So we'll be adding 26 buttons, 13 in each row, and obviously for that we will need a loop. And we can do a for loop, and we'll start from the index of 0, and we'll loop for 26 buttons. Even though there's going to be only 13 buttons in a row, total number of buttons will be 26. I++. And within the loop, we start creating the button. Like I said before, button is just an object. So first, let's create the object. So I'll go up here for the form level, and I'm going to create a button object. So I'm going to create an array of the buttons. So button array, and it will have the name. I'll call it btn, I don't know, buttons. And this will be initialized as a button array of 26. So there will be 26 buttons in that array. So now in our loop, we can play with the indexes of the array and create 26 buttons. So first, we need to create the object of a button, because each button will be its own object. So our btn buttons with the index of I, so the first button we are creating right now, will be the new button. Again, it's just an object. So next, we need to put a text on each of the buttons. So the first button will have a capital letter A, the next button B, then C, and so forth. So how do we do that? How do we do it within the loop to change the text for each of the buttons? Well, the answer is ASCII. So in our ASCII table, if you go to this ASCIItable.com, you can see that each character on the keyboard has a corresponding value that is a number, that is an integer number. For example, capital letter A has a number 65 assigned to it, B is 66, C is 67, and Z is 90. So we'll be using these numbers to get to the character. Remember, this is a character and this is a number. So integer I is a number, and so is the 65 that we will start with. So what we can do is the btn buttons with the index of I, and the text on that button will equal the 65 plus I. So what happens here is that we'll start with the capital letter A, which has the number of 65, and in the first iteration I is 0, so 65 plus 0 is still 65, so it prints letter A. For the next button, I will be 1, so 65 plus 1 is 66, and that corresponds with letter B. In the next iteration, it will be 2, index will be 2, so we'll start from 65 plus 2 is 67, and that gives us letter C. So this way, we'll be able to change the letters on the button as the loop progresses. Now obviously 65 is a number and so is I, so we have to convert it to a character, because that's what we are looking for. We want the character that corresponds with that number. But now it's still not happy. It says cannot implicitly convert type char to string, because we are trying to populate the text, which is a string. So what I have to do, after we convert it to character, we'll convert the whole result to string. And then that will be displayed as a text on the button. So as we loop 26 times, the index changes 26 times, and we will get 26 letters on the alphabet, one letter for each of the buttons. So now we have to position the buttons. So let's start with the width of the button. So btn buttons with the index of I, and the width of it will equal the width of the button. All of these will have the same width, it doesn't change. The height of the button will be the same for each buttons too. So btn buttons I dot height equals btn height. which we assigned 30 pixels. The next, the position left and position from the top. So let's do the left one, btn buttons dot left, and that of course equals the btn left. Now obviously if we just do this, they all would be on top of each other, so we will have to actually move each of the buttons, but we'll do it just in a second. And the top, btn buttons I. The first row will have the same position from the top because they are going to be placed horizontally on the same level or on the same line. So we'll simply do btn top. So we created an object of button with all the properties. So now we add this button to our controls. So controls, and you can see controls is a keyword, and it gets the collection of controls contained within the control. And the collection of controls we are interested in is buttons in this case. So we'll simply add the button to it. So we'll do the btn buttons, and we'll add the single button with the index of I to it. Now obviously the buttons need some event, and in this case it's the click event. So I'm going to add the same event for each of the buttons. So our btn buttons with the index of I, and the event I'm looking for is click. It occurs when the control is clicked. So I'll add to it, so plus equals, and to add an event you'll simply add, again, it's an object, so new event handler, and you are adding the click. Now you have to obviously name the event, and we didn't create it yet, but we'll call it btn sql underscore click. So it's gonna be a click event, and the event is gonna be called btn sql. So we'll add this event. Actually, let's just add it right now, why not, so we don't have the error. So after this method for the load, let's create the event itself, and it's going to be private void, and it's going to be btn sql underscore click. And just like all events, this one will have an object as a sender. This will tell us which of the buttons was actually clicked, and arguments, so event args. So here is our event. For now let's just leave it empty. So we have a button, we added it to the controls, we added a click event to the button. So now we have to move towards the next button. So our left position needs to move to the right. We are moving to the next button that is going to be displayed on the form. So our btn left will now equal the width of the button. So we'll move the width of the button to the right. And for the next button after that, we'll move the width of the button to the right after that. And so forth until we reach 13 buttons. So btn width. Now, like I said before, I want 2 rows of 13 buttons. So what I gotta do is use an if statement and check if I equals not 13 but 12. Remember, I start from 0. So if I equals 12, that means we have 13 buttons. And if that's the case, I want to move to the next row. So our left position has to reset. We want to go back to the left of the form. Remember, we are going to be progressing towards the end of the form, and when we hit 12th button, we want to move back to the left of the form. So I'm just gonna copy paste this, because we are resetting the left position of the next button. And we have to also change the top position, because if we don't, the other 13 buttons will be on top of the first 13 buttons. So our btn top will add the height of the button. So basically we will move the height of the button down. So btn height. So this should draw 26 buttons. So let's test it. And here they are. A, B, C through Z in 2 rows. And you can space them out a little more. Let's say not just the height here, but additional, I don't know, 10 pixels. So it doesn't look so crowded. And they have click event, but obviously nothing has been coded yet. We'll take care of that next.